Joining me now is David Schoen, attorney. He was one of the attorneys also who represented Trump during his second impeachment trial. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Again, you represented Trump against all the lies. And now to hear, according to Tulsi Gabbard, that Obama as well as high-level intelligence officials who also testified under oath before Congress, allegedly knew Trump never colluded with the Russians, but they pushed that narrative anyway. Do you think anyone will be held accountable? And if so, who?
Well, if the evidence points exactly to what we're talking about now, what Ms. Gabbard is talking about and so on, then I think someone will have to be held accountable. Two points I'd like to make. You mentioned impeachment. You know, President Trump is right when he said the immunity decision would help President Obama. But you know what it doesn't help him with? Impeachment. According to the Democratic Party and the House managers in the second impeachment trial, a former president, once out of office, is still subject to impeachment. In other words, they've argued Lincoln could be impeached, George Washington impeached, and certainly, as I predicted at the time, this would come back, they would rue the day, because President Obama could be impeached if this evidence really says what it says. And that it could also strip him of the immunity, because under Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 of the Constitution, the Democrats argued it bars one from holding further office, and the language itself says you're still subject to criminal prosecution or indictment. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think you're right on target when you say today that the narrative now, the media wants to change the narrative. Now the narrative becomes, well, all we said was Russia tried to interfere. We didn't say there was a conspiracy. This was called the Russia collusion, so-called investigation. It was all about collusion, not just about Russia. It was all about a campaign marshaling evidence, giving it to the government, and then the process was flawed from the start. Mueller convened a team of political partisans, all of one party, Trump haters, to pursue this thing. We said that from the start. You can't have integrity if the process itself lacks integrity.
So you think, I didn't even realize that a president couldn't be out of office and still be impeached. Maybe that's the way to go. Now, so the president could be wrong. President Trump, he could be wrong there when he said, oh, well, the Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity, because that only protects a president if he is conducting official acts. And pushing a false narrative, that's not an official act.
But, well, let's say arguably it was an official act. President Trump is right. The immunity decision itself would help President Obama. In other words, he couldn't be indicted right now for it. However, he could be impeached. He doesn't have immunity for impeachment and couldn't have. And according to the Democrats, it's in their brief. I argued vociferously against it when I led the second impeachment trial. I said no, removal from office is really the only remedy for impeachment. They argued vociferously that a president out of office can still be impeached, and they won the day. There was a vote on that, and they narrowly won on jurisdiction, but they won.
What could happen to Obama if he is impeached? What kind of accountability could Brennan face? Could Comey face? I mean, we just played the clips right there where they lied under oath before Congress, yet according to those declassified documents, they already knew that the president had not colluded with Putin, yet they went and testified before Congress that they believed he had. So what kind of accountability, repercussions could Obama, Comey, and Brennan at the least face?
Let's put President Obama to the side just for a second. As for the others, I mean, if the evidence really shows what is being talked about now, and it can be proven, then certainly those others could be charged with seditious conspiracy under 18 U.S.C. 2384, undermining our government, undermining the will of the voters, certainly obstruction of justice, certainly perjury. They'd all be entitled to the presumption of innocence, but those are the kinds of charges that could be brought. As to President Obama, I think he has a fair argument, even if it was a crooked decision. It was a decision made as an official act in office. One would argue it was outside his authority and, that kind of thing. But let's assume he prevailed on that. He still could be impeached, and then he would be tried before the Senate. If convicted before the Senate, then the argument would be, because the Constitution specifically provides for indictment as an option after conviction by the Senate in an impeachment trial, then he could be indicted theoretically.
David, before I let you go real quick, you also represented Jeffrey Epstein, okay? So is there a list, and what do you think? What kind of information does Ghislaine Maxwell hold? She had just she just spoke with Todd Blanche, with the Department of Justice over the course of 2 days, 9 hours. They're expecting to meet with her again. What kind of information could she provide? And is there an official list?
There's no official list. You can be sure Jeffrey Epstein didn't keep any kind of list like on this day, you know, fill in the blank. Bill Clinton was with this young girl or something like that. There's no such list. Maxwell certainly, you know, was close with Epstein for years. She knows a lot of information about, you know, his activities and so on. But you can be sure if there were a young accuser out there who claimed to have a sexual relationship with one of these famous people who's never been sued or charged, they would have been sued. There's a cottage industry of lawyers who have made millions of dollars representing the accusers of Jeffrey Epstein, suing a whole lot of people. Thousands of documents have been released already. I'm afraid there is no more story to this story. I understand that people want, you know, sensational details, but I'm afraid for the conspiracy theorists, they'll never be satisfied. I think we know as much now as we will know. I personally thought it was a mistake to now involve Maxwell in this because you're just giving another day for another news story. Are people going to believe her if today she comes up with certain stories? The immediate reaction is going to be, why didn't she say that when she was indicted? Why? Another flip side of that is, why didn't the government interview her about that at the time? I just think there's so much important business of the country right now, so many wonderful things happening for our country and so on. It's very important to get off of this story and move on to the others. But I understand the interest.
As do I. All right. Thank you so much, David Schoen. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.